Do you want my name?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here. What's your full name?
My name is Andrew John Rumberger,
How do you spell that?
R-U-M-B-E-R-G-E-R, Gleason. And I'm the son of Helen Rumberger and Gus Gleason.
You know what Gus is short for, right?
What?
You're supposed to ask him that.
He never used anything with Gus, so don't ask me.
Okay.
When and where were you born?
Huh?
When and where were you born? Like,
I was born in Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania. Phillipsburg, PA. At a hospital my parents at that time lived in Houtsdale. On November 23rd, 1905.
what were your parents like when you were a kid?
Pardon?
What were your parents like when you were a kid?
What were my parents what?
What were your parents like?
What were they like?
Yeah. What were they like?
That's pretty tough to describe in a few words what your parents are like. My father was a man about 5 feet 10 inches. He attended St. Vincent's College. Is this what you want?
Mm-hmm.
How do you spell? And I can't say it right.
Vincents.
Where he was active in sports. Lettering in baseball and football.
Your dad
He
was like.
originally a salesman, and then a lawyer. To describe the kind of a person my father was, and this is a typical story, right after they were married, and he was still a salesman, there was a whole carload of bananas. They were consigned to a local merchant. You better let your father get this on.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I can't read
Yeah.
that all.
They were consigned to a local merchant, but he didn't pick them up. So they had to sell them quick. Dad and a friend of his named Ed Kinney bought the carload at a very low price. They had to unload the car right away. They didn't have any place to keep the bananas. There were no warehouses around Houtsdale. So he just stored the bananas in our home, in the cellar. My mother always said that the smell of bananas never went away. They had to move before they could get away, because they had to get away from the smell of the bananas. You can dress that up any way you want to.
Well, you can imagine how Mom would feel if I came home and filled the basement with crate after crate. Whole freight car. You've seen the train loads?
It's huge.
What do you think about that?
That is like amazing. I don't know how that would fit in our basement.
Trying to think about it. Mother was a very this might illustrate. One day when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was playing on the front porch and jumping from the front porch down onto the ground. So I was told not to do it, but naturally I kept on doing it. So one time on one of the jumps, I slipped and I broke my arm. Now, the next day, we were supposed to go to Houtzdale. We were living in Du Bois at that time for a vacation. The pain was very great that night, and I couldn't get to sleep. So Mother gave me a real heavy dose of what then was they called Gorg. It was a concoction that was sold over the counter, was supposed to be very safe, but in those days, not having the Food and Drug Administration and so forth, the base of the drug was opium.
It's opium.
A little stronger than cocaine. A very serious drug.
Oh my goodness.
So I went right to sleep. Then Mother got worried that she gave me too much. And all that night, I didn't get any sleep anyway, because she came in every hour or so and shook me to get me awake to see that I was still living.
How many brothers and sisters did you have, and what were they like?
Well, I had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. None of them were like each other. They were all individuals. And remember, because you have the same genes in you, they were Irish and Pennsylvania Dutch. That means you have a wild Irish streak in you, and a very stubborn Pennsylvania Dutch streak in you. Well, I'm half Irish, half Pennsylvania Dutch, because Dad's family were pure Irish and Mother's family were pure Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah,
Rumberger
but Granny diluted the Irish by putting in that Welsh blood.
Oh yeah, I mean, that was terrible of her, but anyway.
But then Mom and Dad diluted it further with Scots blood. You know, so she's almost 1/2 Irish on her mom's side, straight down, because the whole family's Irish.
Oh, there's a chance for her.
Yeah, there's a chance. There's a chance.
With all that Welsh and Scotch in you, I don't know, but you got a chance with all that Irish. Well, the Irish over on Donegal Hill, of course, were very nationalistic, and they raised money and supported the Irish.
What happened in 1916, though, when the Easter Rebellion was put down? I mean, what was that like? Did you guys even hear about it then?
Oh yeah. Well, all the Irish figured That's just a temporary setback. Remember, they'd been fighting for, what, 500 years. They weren't going to give up. They'd been licked so often and come back that they weren't going to sit down and take it.
Were you close with any of your siblings? And
Huh?
were you really close with any of your siblings more than the others?
I was very close to my brother Ted.
What was he like as a kid?
Ted was a twin, and I was close to Betty, but not nearly as close as I was to Ted. That closeness existed throughout my whole life.
What did Ted end up doing?
Huh?
What did Ted end up doing?
Ted was a doctor. He was a very dedicated person. He served in the Army as a battalion surgeon with the 32nd Division. Do you want this?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
In the Pacific. He was one of the most decorated doctors in Pennsylvania. He received the Silver Star and the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart.
What did those mean?
What
did those dots
They're
say?
Army decorations.
Awards. Purple Heart is when you're injured, but the Bronze Star and the Silver Star are for doing something above and beyond the call of duty. That you
With
did
an
something
utter
very special.
With an utter disregard for your personal safety. Turk got the the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. The day of Pearl Harbor, I received a phone call from Wichita Falls, Texas, and it was my brother Turk, who had been drafted into the Army. The draft started a year before the war broke out. He had gone AWOL and was in Wichita Falls.
Absent without leave.
Which meant...
He wasn't supposed to be there, and he was.
Pardon?
He wasn't supposed to be there, but he was.
And if he didn't get back to the base right away, he would probably be labeled a deserter. And a deserter in wartime isn't good. So he and another guy that had gone AWOL had found a fellow with an airplane in Wichita Falls who for $100 would fly them back to San Antonio where he's stationed. So he wanted to know if I'd wire him the $100, which I certainly got down quick and wired it to him. And he got back before they had roll call the next morning.
Because otherwise it'd have been in big trouble.
He'd have been in big trouble.
The other story that I love from Turk was what he said to the general who was giving him the medal when the general asked him what he liked best about the Army.
That's when he said he didn't like anything about the Army, but
Not a gosh darn thing.
if he wanted to stand there, he could tell him what he didn't like about it.
Anyway. Okay.
What was school like when you were a kid? And did you
Well,
like it?
I went to a Catholic school, and at that time, all the teachers were nuns, and they maintained strict very strict discipline.
How'd they do that? Can you give an example of their usual discipline?
Mostly it was you had to stay after school.
That was it? Wow, it was doing like 3. Because, like,
What would she liked school, so staying after school wouldn't be a punishment.
It was to us. We didn't want to stay after school, but then everybody was afraid of them. Most of the parents of the kids who were 90% Irish were afraid to talk back because their parents or grandparents had been raised in Ireland, and you just didn't talk back to nuns.
What were the classes like?
The classes, they taught by rote.
what's that mean?
You repeated and repeated and repeated. In other words, if you were learning the tables, you started 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, up to 12. Yeah. Then you repeated it, and you repeated it, and you repeated it until it's stuck in your head. I still think up until high school, everything should be taught by rote. Now, remember this. The one teacher taught every subject. You went in the classroom, you stayed in that classroom. You didn't get out of it until school was out.
Not even for lunch?
Huh?
Not even for like lunch?
Yeah, for lunch you got out, but I mean...
No switching classes like they do in high school.
Classes. You were in that room, and the one nun taught everything. Katie, I think the answer to it was this. There were 8 kids, as I told you, in our family. We come over to Johnstown, which at that time was rated one of the highest school districts in Pennsylvania. You could go to any school practically in the country if you graduated in the first third of your class at Johnstown High. You could get in the University of Pennsylvania, University of Pittsburgh, any of them. But we came from Du Bois. I was in my last year in high school. The rest of them were all the way down to the 1st grade. And we got at least as good and sometimes better grades over at Johnstown than we got in Du Bois.
So you figure it was a pretty good school system.
So it was a good school. It was a real good system. The Knights of Columbus, that's KFC, had a big gymnasium. So we played football in the fall. During the winter, they had a swimming pool and a gym. We played basketball. Then come about May, then we played baseball and went swimming. In different places outdoors. We just continued that all summer.
Did you have chores you had to do?
Unless you could sneak out.
What kind of chores did you have?
About like 10.
Not very many. Mother gave up after a while, to tell you the truth.
Like, what kind of tours did you have?
In fact, Dad used to get mad because she'd have somebody come to cut the grass and somebody, because she could never get any of us to do anything. We'd skip. When World War I broke out, I was only about 9 years old. It's pretty hard to realize the seriousness of it at that time. We played war. I could never remember of enduring any hardships during the war.
Did anybody from the town go off to fight?
Oh yes,
Did anybody not come back?
there were a lot.
Do you remember any of them?
Yeah, there was a Negan and there was a Cannon. One of the Sullivans, I can't remember. Andy, you're going back over 80 years.
Well, do you want to tell Kate that story
Now,
about
you're
the...
not having me telling Kate this, you're getting this for yourself.
It's a little bit of both. She's doing her homework assignment. They lost the tape.
When the World War I was over, I was over in Houtzdale. It was during August, and I usually went to Houtzdale and stayed all summer during the vacation. So before the real armistice came, you won't be able to take this down.
We've got the tape.
There was what they called the false armistice. There was an announcement that the war was over. Actually, it wasn't over till about 3 days later. But when the news came to Houtzdale, it came at night, and all the bells, as soon as the news came, they started ringing all the bells all over town to celebrate. At that time, I was about 9, 10 years old. So I got out of bed, got dressed, and ran up to the church where they were ringing the bells. And a guy named Eddie Gorman and another guy named South were ringing the bells, and they said to me, "Andy, how about you ringing these bells, and we're going up to the Polish church. Nobody's gotten their bells yet, and we're going to start to ring their bells." So I said, all right. I was ringing the bell, and the priest, who was in charge of the church, came in, and he said, "How'd you get in here?" And I said, "Well, a couple of fellows were ringing the bell, and I came in, and they asked me to ring it on." He said, "No, you broke in." I said, "No, that's the way it happened." "I don't believe you. Who were the boys?" Well, by that time I knew if I told who they were going to get in trouble. So I wouldn't tell them. And he said, all right. He said, if you're not out of town in 48 hours, I'm going to have you arrested for breaking into the church. Well, I went back that night to my Aunt Alice's where I was staying. And I couldn't sleep. I was scared. I thought I was going to get driven out of town. So the next day I went down to town to my grandfather, who ran a hardware store there. And I told him what had happened. It's the only time in my life I have ever heard my grandfather swear. Only time I ever heard him swear. And he turned around and he went right up to where the priest lived. And he said, "Don't you worry about it." So I didn't worry about it.
Did you leave town within 48 hours?
I certainly did not.
I didn't think so. Now,
Well, I had a cousin, John, and he had a incurable condition. He was about my age, and I used to go over to Houtsdale and visit him, and I used to stay with him, and we were very, very close. His parents were well-to-do, and he had every toy that you can think of. But every time I bought him a toy, he made them buy a toy for me. And if there's any toy he didn't have at that time, I don't know what it was. So I had practically every toy you could think of. The toys that I remember most vividly was a circus that was made in Germany. All the animals, and there must have been 50 of them, tigers, elephants, lions, and everything, they had joints, and you could twist them around. Then they also had trapeze actors and clowns, and the things that the clowns used, and they were all made that you could bend them, their joints and everything, and you could put them like climbing a ladder or put them on a trapeze, and they had little grooves that they would put their hands in. Magnificent things.
all handmade.
All handmade. They were only made in Germany. He got a set of them and then insisted his parents got me a set too.
You can go back to your list of questions, Kate.
Okay.
Now that's all of interview for you. You ask me what you want.
Okay. That's
Well-
fair.
What was it like during the Great Depression?
Honest, Katie, if you didn't live the Great Depression, I don't think anybody can describe it. I was lucky. My father had a good position, and I had jobs. But people were really desperate to get work. And we were building highways at that time. We only worked somebody for 2 days for 10 hours, and they got $4 a day. And they were living on $8 a week and raising families on $8 a week. People were desperate. People may not like Franklin Roosevelt, but in my opinion, if Franklin Roosevelt hadn't been elected president and started DPA and other government agencies, we'd have had anarchy in this country. Conditions were so bad.
What's anarchy mean?
Huh?
What does anarchy mean?
Anarchy means revolution.
People fighting in the streets because they didn't have food or jobs.
Oh, not good.
Unless you actually lived through the Depression, I don't think I have never read an account of the Depression that to me seemed adequate.